Good evening, everybody. Don't you love Barry's enthusiasm? I sit here and I'm thinking, I wish I could come to these courses every night. I was feeling bad enough that I'm standing here filling in for the governor. I'm now questioning my relevance as a man and whether I'm obsolete. So I'm feeling really bad. But it's great to be here. I appreciate being invited. I understand there's a question and answer session later, and I'll be happy to answer the easy questions. And then, but I'm also hoping that there is some policy advice for the governor. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we should be thinking about as we embark on the second term. But I was asked to talk at you for a little bit and to talk about what it is I do as Secretary of Administration and Finance, what the governor's priorities are for the second term, and how those translate into what I need to do to help further those priorities. So what do I do? Secretary of Administration and Finance. The A part of administration is mostly the backbone functions of state government. I've got agencies like the Department of Revenue, the Human Resources Division, the IT Division, the agency that manages all the state's assets. All those backbone shared service kind of agencies that help serve the rest of state government are within my secretariat. That's the A part. The F part is the part that I end up spending most of my time on, particularly over the last couple of years. Finance. I'm the governor's chief finance person. I help him develop his budget proposals, work with the legislature on what the final budget ends up being. I don't have as much influence in that process as I would like. Hopefully more over the second term. And we also, in my office, manage the state's capital investment budget. The investments we make in roads and bridges and prisons and courts and parks and everything else, which is funded through a separate capital budget, mostly from borrowing and federal money. So that's the F part of my job. And I'm also, as Secretary of Administration and Finance, designated by law to sit on a number of different state boards and commissions. One example is the Healthcare Connector, the state agency that was set up to carry out healthcare reform in Massachusetts. I'm the chair of that board statutorily. Greg and I also chair the Life Science Center, which has been the entity that's been carrying out one of the governor's big initiatives in the first term, the Life Science Initiative. So I think there are about 30 or so different boards and commissions that I sit on. Institutionally, my secretariat, I think, is a little different from the others. I'd be interested to know whether Greg agrees with this. But each of the other secretariats they carry out programs and services directly to the public. So Greg's secretariat, he's got housing and economic development, he's got housing programs, he's trying to build affordable housing, community working with communities. The Secretary of Health and Human Services has all kinds of human service programs that are serving all kinds of people. And in their roles, institutionally, they are doing the best they can on behalf of the governor and the state to serve the people who their secretariats serve. For me, I don't really have that, or at least not in the same kind of way. And institutionally, the Secretary of A&F and the Secretariat, I think my role institutionally is to try to help the governor, particularly in the context of the fiscal constraints we have, think about how to balance all of those competing priorities. Greg is going to go to him and say, I need more money for housing, and here's why it's important for you to give me more money for housing. I got to help the governor balance that with what the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Secretary of Energy and Environment is also asking the governor, and they all are hearing directly all the time from all the advocacy groups and constituents who rely on the services they provide. So A&F is kind of a unique beast from that perspective. So that's what I do. In terms of the governor's priorities for the second term, we actually have a retreat scheduled for next week, the cabinet with the governor, to discuss exactly that topic, hear from the governor about his agenda, and talk about how we move forward to implement it. I think it's pretty clear to me that there are some things that are on that agenda for him. Continued focus on job creation in Massachusetts, continued focus on education, both because of the importance of it in and of its own right, in terms of giving our children a chance and a leg up to compete in the 21st century, but also as critical to our economic development and growth and strength in providing an educated workforce here in Massachusetts. Healthcare has been a priority of the governor's and will continue to be, with a particular focus on healthcare cost containment. And I'm sorry I missed that class because it is a big issue and one of his top priorities for the second term. And continued focus on how we change the way government does business, to reform government, to be more efficient, more effective, stretch taxpayer dollars as far as they can go, and do a better job in serving the public. So those are, I expect, going to be some of his key priorities for the second term. And they're consistent with what he has been focusing on. Barry, I think, probably took a lot of Greg's speech in terms of the success we've had through our focus on the economy and jobs, and how we're outperforming the rest of the country in many respects and on many of those indicators. Education, despite the fiscal challenges we've been facing, which I'll describe in a second, we have, in every year of the governor's first term, had a historic level of investment in K through 12 education through the Chapter 70 program. In terms of healthcare, the healthcare reform law passed right before we came into office 4 years ago, but we had to implement that law. A lot of hard decisions to make through the connector in terms of how to strike the right balance in implementing that law. I think we've done it successfully. We're now about 98% of the state's population has healthcare coverage, far beyond where any other state is in the country, and you all know that at the federal level they've basically adopted the Massachusetts model in many respects and are taking it across the country. So there are a lot of successes over the course of the first term in these areas of focus, but we've got a lot more work to do in a very challenging environment. The other thing I want to say, though, although I wasn't asked to talk about this, but when talking about the governor's priorities for the second term, I also think it's important to talk about his values and how he goes about governing, because it influences how we go about carrying out those priorities. And I think this is also consistent with the way he approached these issues in the first term. First, he describes it often as government as a place where policy touches people. For him, it's all about people. And that influences the way he thinks about the decisions he's making, the way in which he talks to us about what he wants us to do. And I think it is reflected in the way in which he governs. The other thing about his values that I wanted to point out is he truly is governing for the long term. He's thinking not only about the impacts today, but tomorrow, the impact on a taxpayer today and the impact on a taxpayer tomorrow. And it is inconsistent with the way in which government is institutionally set up. We've got a lot of people making decisions about how to spend money who are running for re-election every 2 years, and a governor who's running for re-election every 4 years, and they all want to have good stuff to talk about today. And it isn't consistent with a long-term perspective and making decisions that maybe don't have immediate results, but are the right thing to do for the long term. And he really, truly, genuinely does care about that, and that also influences the way he governs. I share those values. It's great to work with somebody who has them. And for me, in approaching the budget, and I know this is consistent with the way he thinks about it, it means that the budget isn't a math exercise. That would be easy. If we knew, all right, we've got this much less resources this year, so we just need to cut the amount we're spending to make sure we end up with that amount of spending. That would be easy if that's all we had to think about, but it's not. It's about the people we're serving behind those line items. It's about what we are trying to accomplish, what we need to invest in, how we position ourselves for the future, and it's about the investments we're making in our collective well-being. And that's the way he thinks about it, and the way I approach my job on his behalf to help him develop and think about the budget. So, looking forward, in light of his priorities and his values, what does it mean for me in terms of, in my role, what I need to do for him? I think the obvious, most critical thing is that all these priorities he has in his agenda take what everything else takes, which is money. It takes more than money, but the extent to which we can fund in a sustainable way those priorities of his and the other stuff that state government needs to do is going to be a huge determinant of the success of achieving those objectives in the second term. So from my perspective, the ability to help him manage the budget in a way that supports those priorities and in a way that's sustainable over time, because that's equally as important, is what I see as my primary role in helping him do what he was elected to do and wants to do in the second term. The big challenge is that we are doing that in the most challenging fiscal context since the Great Depression, particularly for state governments. And this isn't unique to Massachusetts, this is across the country. State governments, state and local governments, and the fiscal situation at the state level has been extremely challenging as a result of the recession. Over the last couple of years, we have seen state tax revenues, from the peak right before the recession started to the trough where we fell to the lowest level, dropped by $4 billion. Our annual tax revenues at the high point were estimated to be over $21 billion. They dropped by $4 billion on a baseline basis. The steepest decline in tax revenues as a percentage basis and a real dollar basis, however you want to look at it, in state history. So that created a significant challenge. At the same time, the recession has been making it difficult for more and more people who are needing to rely more and more on the state for services and the state safety net programs, and that has created increased demand in our subsidized health insurance programs, our homeless programs, and many others, which is increasing cost pressures on state government. So right at the time where we need more to address the needs of more people, we have much less. And over the course of the last 3 years, it's created budget gaps totaling $13 billion cumulatively over the last 3 years. We spend about $30 billion a year in the state budget. So that gives you a sense of how big the gap is we've been having to address. We've been addressing it through a lot of tough decisions, in part through a lot of tough decisions. We have, since the recession started, eliminated about 3,300 positions just in the executive branch under the governor's control. There are about 40-some thousand people in the executive branch. We have we had to negotiate with unions, and I'm sorry I missed the class on unions. That's another part of my job, is I am the employer for collective bargaining purposes on behalf of the state. So I do all of our collective bargaining negotiations for the governor. We negotiated the lowest cost collective bargaining agreements in the history of collective bargaining in the state, and got concessions from unions across the board that had also never been done before. Union people taking furloughs and giving other concessions. Managers across state government for a couple of years have taken furloughs. So lots of hard stuff. Required state employees to pay more toward their health insurance coverage. We've had to cut benefits and programs across the board. One example is in our subsidized health program, we no longer offer preventative dental coverage for the it's for adults in the Mass Health program. And there are examples of that throughout state government. We also have changed the way in which we do business to try to be more efficient. There are a lot of different ways in which we've reformed state government to be more efficient, to generate savings. The one example that I think is people probably have heard of and that I think is the most significant change is transportation reform. We had a number of different transportation bureaucracies, many of which doing the same things with different assets. We've combined them into one agency that is coordinating policy on transportation. It is sharing resources, shared services, generating savings through the consolidation, savings through reforms to transportation employee benefits, and a number of other aspects of the reform initiative. One example is we just, as part of the transportation reform bill, we gave ourselves authorization to finance transportation infrastructure in a different way, with a different credit structure, supported by our transportation revenues, gas tax, and R&V. We just went to the rating agencies a few weeks ago, and we just heard last week that they rated our new transportation bonds AAA, the highest credit rating you can get. There's never been in state history a Commonwealth bond issued AAA, and that was because of transportation reform. We're gonna borrow $3 billion to fund the state's accelerated bridge program to fix over 200 bridges, structurally deficient bridges across the Commonwealth, and that rating alone, just getting that rating, is going to save us $60 million in debt service costs to finance that program. That $60 million we can put into financing more projects that need to be done. So there's a lot of savings like that that we have accomplished by changing the way government does business. We've had to rely on some new revenues. During the campaign, it maybe sounded like at times that all we did was raise taxes in order to close that $13 billion gap. Only 9% of that gap was from new revenue solutions, much more in cuts and reforms and efficiencies. We also relied to a great extent, like every other state in the country, on federal stimulus funds to help bridge the gap to recovery, and on our own rainy day funds. So that's the context in terms of how we've dealt with the fiscal crisis to date. We still face challenges going forward in the second term. And there are a lot of good signs, as Barry pointed out, how our economy is in recovery mode now, how things are looking better. State tax revenues are growing instead of declining, which I'm really happy about. Didn't used to be that way. But we have a huge hole to dig ourselves out of. And while state tax revenues are growing and growing pretty steadily and consistently because of the economic growth, it's going to take a while to get back to where we were. In addition to that, the federal government is no longer going to be providing us with support, and that bridge to recovery is not quite as long as I would like it to be. Next fiscal year, we will have $0 in federal stimulus funding compared to this fiscal year where we've had about $1.6 billion. Right there, that's a $1.6 billion shortfall that we're starting our budget planning process for next fiscal year. The last big factor that creates a big challenge is healthcare costs. About half of the state budget is for health or human service programs. Our subsidized health insurance programs like Medicaid and the program through the connector, ComCare, and employee health benefits, and then human service programs that provide services to developmentally disabled and mentally ill and others. Everybody knows healthcare costs grow like this. It is completely unsustainable for businesses. It's unsustainable for individuals. It's unsustainable for local governments. And I can confirm it is unsustainable for state government. If you look back over the last 10 years or so, you would see a historic trend with our healthcare costs funded out of the state budget growing like this, and everything else in state government going like this as a percentage of the total state budget. That trend cannot continue because it's going to result in our inability to continue to provide that comprehensive coverage that I talked about initially. And it's going to result in our not being able to do any of the other stuff that state government does. So we absolutely have to address that, and we need to address it. We need to address it now. We need to change the way in which we provide that coverage. So we've got real challenges. There are going to be more tough decisions. What excites me so I say that to people, and people say, "Oh my God, you've got the worst job in the world." I actually love my job. It's hard and it's challenging, and I don't like having to tell the governor we don't have money for that thing that you really want to do. But it's a huge opportunity right now. And I think it's one of the things that excites the governor about the second term. Unfortunately, in government, it often takes a crisis before some major reform or meaningful change happens in government. It's just the nature of the beast. Well, we are in that place right now. We not only have the dynamics that present the opportunity for meaningful change, we don't have a choice because of our fiscal situation. We have to do things differently. We have to. So we are working on a long list of stuff to make meaningful change in government and to change the way government delivers services, to not only save money, but to do it smarter, to do it better, to serve people better. And I'm energized by that opportunity. One example of the kind of thing we're looking at, which the governor proposed last year, and we're developing a proposal again for this year, is pension reform. We did get past some pension reform provisions in the first term that dealt with some of the abuses in the pension system, a lot of the stuff that you read about on the front page of the Herald, for those who read the Herald. But we need to do much more. We need to completely modernize our pension system. You see this happening across the country and across the world. You've probably been reading in the papers recently about France and all the riots and protests in France because they wanted to raise the retirement age from 60 to 62. And it nearly shut down the country. Those are the kinds of things we need to be looking at in state government in order to reduce our costs, not only today, but over the long term, and allow us to continue to provide the level of services that people expect and deserve. So I'm energized by that opportunity, and I think the extent to which we're successful in leveraging the challenges to get meaningful change done, that is going to be, in my view, the determining factor in how successful we are in helping the governor create more jobs, continue to invest in education and implement education reform, contain healthcare costs, and all the other things that he wants to do in the second term. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Greg.